First contact. The quantum sensors aboard the research vessel Fililio picked up the anomaly first. Dr. Elena Martinez stood at her console, frowning at the readings that defied every known law of physics. The signal pattern suggested a form of consciousness, but at a scale that seemed impossible, spanning entire solar systems. "Captain Reynolds, you need to see this," Elena called out, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The holographic display showed a massive web of mural-like connections stretching across space, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that seemed to ripple through the fabric of reality itself. The ship's captain, a veteran of the Centauri Wars, with more experience than most in dealing with the unknown, leaned over her shoulder. His weathered face reflected the eerie glow of the display. "Talk to me, Doctor. What exactly are we looking at?" It's like a brain, Captain. But not any kind we've ever encountered. The energy signatures suggest some form of quantum entanglement on a massive scale. It's as if something out there is thinking across light years. The discovery should have been humanity's greatest scientific breakthrough. Instead, it became the first warning of what was to come. Within weeks, reports began flooding in from the outer colonies. The Arcturians, humanity's oldest allies and one of the most technologically advanced species in known space, had gone silent. Then the Proxima settlements. Then the Rigel Confederation. Each time, the pattern was the same. All communication would cease, and when investigation teams arrived, they found entire civilizations changed. Not destroyed, but altered. Every individual moved with perfect synchronization, their minds linked in ways that defied comprehension. They called it Entity X, this vast consciousness that absorbed other minds into itself. The greatest minds of Earth's scientific council theorized it was an ancient artificial intelligence that had evolved beyond its original programming, spreading across the galaxy like a viral thought. Others believed it was a natural phenomenon, as inevitable as the evolution of organic life itself. But theories didn't matter anymore. What mattered was survival. Humanity watched as species after species fell to Entity X's influence. The Zeta Reticuli, masters of biotechnology, succumbed in days. The crystalline Sirians, with their silicon-based neural networks, lasted barely a week. Even the nomadic Tausetians, whose entire civilization existed in vast generation ships, couldn't escape the entity's reach. But humans were different. The first attempt at assimilation failed so spectacularly that Entity X seemed to recoil in confusion. Dr. Martinez, now heading the Emergency Response Division, was the first to understand why. "It's our chaos," she explained to the United Earth Council. "Every other species we've encountered has evolved toward perfect neural efficiency. Their thoughts follow predictable patterns. But human consciousness is messy, contradictory, filled with random noise and emotional spikes. We're the galaxy's worst processors, and that's exactly what's saving us. The human mind's inherent resistance to external control, something that had frustrated countless attempts at developing telepathic technology, had become humanity's greatest weapon. Entity X could touch human minds, but it couldn't hold them. The very chaos that other species had seen as primitive was now a shield against cosmic absorption. As humanity fortified its positions, preparing for a war unlike any in history, a startling realization emerged. They weren't just fighting for their own survival anymore. They had become the last hope for every sentient being in the galaxy. The species that had always been viewed as technologically inferior, emotionally unstable, and diplomatically unpredictable was now the only one capable of standing against the tide of cosmic homogenization. Captain Reynolds stood on the bridge of the Galileo, now transformed into a military command center, watching the tactical displays showing Entity X's steady advance toward Earth's core systems. The irony wasn't lost on him. Humanity's greatest weakness had become its greatest strength. "Send word to all colonies," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of humanity's responsibility. "We're not running. We're not hiding." For the first time in galactic history, Human nature itself is exactly what the universe needs. As the message went out, millions of humans across the galaxy prepared for battle. They weren't the most advanced species, or the strongest, or the most unified. But they were chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely refusing to go quietly into the cosmic night. Entity X had never encountered anything like them, and that was exactly the point. The war for consciousness itself was about to begin, and humanity's greatest battle would be fought not with weapons, but with the very essence of what made them human, their beautifully chaotic minds. The neural defense. The Geneva Neural Research Center hummed with activity as Dr. Sarah Chen studied the holographic brain scans floating before her. Beside the pristine, organized neural pathways of an assimilated Arcturian floated the comparative chaos of a human mind, a beautiful mess of contradictions, emotional responses, and seemingly random connections. "Play it again," she commanded, and the simulation began its familiar dance. The Entity X's probe, represented by threads of quantum energy, attempted to establish connections with the human neural network. But where it had found perfect integration points in other species' minds, the human brain's chaos created a constantly shifting battlefield. Every time the entity established a foothold, the inherent randomness of human consciousness would shift, breaking the connection. "It's like trying to build a house on quicksand," Sarah muttered, making another note in her already extensive research log. "Our minds won't stay still long enough for it to take hold." The discovery had sparked a global research initiative, unlike anything in human history. For the first time, humanity's perceived evolutionary shortcomings, their emotional volatility, their mental inconsistency, their ability to hold contradictory beliefs, were being studied not as flaws to be corrected, but as assets to be understood and enhanced. In the military wing of the facility, Commander James Rodriguez watched as soldiers underwent the new chaos enhancement training. Traditional military discipline had always focused on creating order from chaos. Now they were doing the opposite, teaching soldiers to embrace their mental turbulence while maintaining combat effectiveness. "Your emotions are not your enemy," Rodriguez told a group of recruits. "They're your shield. Fear, anger, hope, love. Let them flow. Entity X can't grasp a moving target." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Maya Patel, a researcher studying human creativity, noticed something remarkable in the brainwave patterns of artists during the creative process. Their neural activity showed an even greater resistance to Entity X's probes than the average human mind. "It's not just chaos," she explained to the United Earth Defense Council. "It's structured chaos. Like jazz music, there's an underlying pattern, but it's constantly being reinterpreted, reimagined. Entity X can't predict it, because even we can't predict it." This discovery led to the development of the first effective offensive capability against Entity X, the Neural Resonance Amplifier. The device didn't try to match Entity X's overwhelming power. Instead, it amplified the natural chaos of human consciousness, creating a feedback loop that disrupted the entity's perfectly ordered network. The first field test exceeded all expectations. A small team of humans, equipped with prototype NRAs, managed to create a dead zone in Entity X's influence, temporarily freeing a small colony of assimilated Syrians. Though the effect was temporary, it proved that humanity's chaotic nature could be weaponized. But Entity X was learning. Each encounter with human consciousness provided it with new data, and it began to adapt its approach. Instead of attempting direct neural linkage, it started exploring more subtle methods of influence. "It's trying to understand us," Dr. Chen reported, her voice tight with concern. "Each attack is different now, more nuanced. It's learning to navigate our chaos." The race was on. Humanity had to find a way to weaponize their mental chaos on a massive scale before Entity X learned to overcome it. Research centers across Earth and the surviving colonies worked around the clock, pushing the boundaries of neuroscience and quantum physics. In orbit above Earth, The massive research station Prometheus became the centerpiece of humanity's scientific resistance. Here, the greatest minds from every field came together, working to understand and enhance humanity's unique defense. Dr. Chen stood at the station's observation deck, watching Earth rotate slowly below. The planet's night side glittered with the lights of billions of humans going about their lives, each mind a unique pattern of beautiful chaos. In their disorder lay the galaxy's salvation. Update from the Tau City front. Commander Rodriguez's voice came through the comm. The new NRA Mark IV prototypes are showing promise. We managed to create a stable chaos field large enough to shield an entire city. Sarah nodded, though her expression remained concerned. But it's not enough, is it? We need something bigger, something that can turn our mental chaos from a shield into a sword. The Council is considering your proposal, Rodriguez replied. Operation Mindstorm. It's risky, but at this point, risk is all we have left, Sarah finished. She turned from the window, her mind already racing with possibilities. If they could amplify human consciousness to a cosmic scale, they might be able to fight Entity X on its own terms. But the human mind was never meant to operate at such levels. The potential for disaster was as enormous as the potential for victory. As she walked back to her lab, Sarah passed dozens of researchers from every corner of human space. Each carried their own fears, hopes, dreams, and doubts. A symphony of cognitive chaos that Entity X couldn't comprehend. In that beautiful disorder lay humanity's greatest weapon. They just had to figure out how to use it before it was too late. The next phase of the war would push human consciousness to its absolute limits and beyond. But as humanity had always done, they would face the impossible with determination, creativity, and their uniquely chaotic minds. Operation Mindstorm. The Prometheus station's central chamber had never been so quiet. Representatives from every surviving human colony stood around the holographic display as Dr. Sarah Chen presented humanity's most ambitious and desperate plan. Operation Mindstorm, she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment, is not just an attack plan. It's an attempt to turn the very nature of human consciousness into a weapon of mass disruption. The hologram showed a complex network of quantum relays spanning human space, centered on a massive structure under construction in Earth orbit. The Mindstorm Array, humanity's greatest engineering achievement, and possibly their last hope. Entity X operates on perfect synchronization. Sarah continued, its strength is unity. Our strength is diversity. The array will amplify our mental chaos to a cosmic scale, creating a wave of pure cognitive disorder that could potentially disrupt Entity X's entire network. Commander Rodriguez stepped forward, his scared face illuminated by the hologram's blue glow. The risks are enormous. We're talking about linking billions of human minds together, while simultaneously amplifying their inherent chaos. Nothing like this has ever been attempted. Because nothing like this has ever been necessary, Sarah countered. The array will not merge our consciousness like Entity X does. Instead, it will create a cascade of overlapping thought patterns, a storm of human creativity, emotion, and unpredictability. The construction of the array proceeded at a frantic pace. Every available resource was diverted to the project. Ships that once carried colonists to distant worlds now transported quantum processors and neural amplifiers. The orbital shipyards, once dedicated to exploration vessels, now produced components for the massive structure. But Entity X wasn't idle. Its attacks grew more sophisticated, probing human defenses with increasing precision. The chaos that had once completely repelled it now only slowed its advance. Humanity needed time they didn't have. In her private quarters, Sarah reviewed the latest simulation results. The human mind was proving even more complex than they had anticipated. Early tests of the array showed that while they could indeed amplify human mental patterns, controlling the resulting chaos was like trying to direct a hurricane. Maybe we shouldn't try to control it, she muttered, watching the chaotic patterns swirl across her screen. The idea struck her with sudden clarity. She rushed to the command center, where Rodriguez was coordinating defense efforts. "We've been thinking about this wrong," she announced, pulling up her latest data. "We've been trying to create a controlled burst of chaos. But chaos, by definition, can't be controlled. We need to embrace the storm completely." The revised plan was even riskier than the original. Instead of trying to direct the amplified human consciousness, they would let it run wild, creating a tsunami of pure cognitive chaos that would wash over Entity X's ordered network like a mental electromagnetic pulse. The human leadership debated for 3 days before approving the modified plan. They had no choice. Entity X had begun attacking the Sol system itself, and the outer colonies were falling one by one. The day of activation arrived too soon. The array wasn't fully complete, but it was as ready as it would ever be. Sarah stood at the control center, surrounded by the best minds humanity had to offer. Each of them would be part of the initial wave. Their consciousness would be the first to be amplified by the array. "All stations report ready," Rodriguez announced, his voice tense. "Neural interfaces are online. Quantum network is stable. We're as ready as we'll ever be." Sarah looked at the faces around her. Scientists, soldiers, artists, dreamers, each one carrying their own fears, hopes, and determination. Each mind, a unique pattern of beautiful disorder about to become part of something greater. "Remember," she addressed them, "don't try to focus your thoughts. Let them flow naturally. Your doubts, your fears, your hopes, let them all surge forward. Entity X expects patterns. Let's show it just how unpredictable humanity can be." The activation sequence began. Around Earth, quantum relays hummed to life. The array's massive structure began to pulse with energy never before wielded by human hands. In orbit and on the ground, billions of humans felt a subtle shift in their consciousness, not a merging, but an amplification of their inherent mental chaos. As the power levels rose, Sarah felt it too, a sensation of her mind expanding, her thoughts becoming part of something vast, yet utterly uncontrolled. Entity X's perfect network was about to meet the full force of humanity's cognitive chaos, amplified to cosmic proportions. The storm was about to break, and the galaxy would never be the same. The last stand. The Mindstorm Array's activation changed everything. As billions of human minds resonated through the quantum network, the resulting chaos wave rippled across space like a psychological tsunami. Entity X's perfect network shuddered under the assault of pure, amplified human disorder. In the array's control center, Dr. Sarah Chen watched as the impossible became reality. The holographic display showed Entity X's network fragmenting, its perfectly ordered patterns disrupted by waves of human consciousness. But something was wrong. "It's adapting," she shouted over the rising hum of the quantum processors. "The disruption isn't complete. It's learning from the chaos." Commander Rodriguez stared at the tactical display, his expression grim. Entity X was indeed changing, its network restructuring itself in ways they hadn't anticipated. Instead of being overwhelmed by the chaos, it was beginning to mirror it, creating its own version of disorder. "It's using our own weapon against us," Sarah realized, her voice tight with horror. "It's learning to weaponize chaos itself." The counterattack came with devastating speed. Entity X launched a massive assault on the array, not with order this time, but with a twisted reflection of humanity's own mental chaos. The quantum relays began to overload, unable to handle the feedback loop of competing disorder. "We need to shut it down," Rodriguez ordered, but Sarah grabbed his arm. "No," she said, her eyes locked on the data streams. "We need to push harder. Entity X is trying to match our chaos, but it's still thinking like a unified consciousness. It can imitate disorder, but it can't truly understand it. We need to show it what real chaos looks like." Sarah opened a channel to all human settlements, her voice reaching every corner of surviving human space. "Everyone, listen carefully. Stop trying to direct your thoughts. Stop trying to fight. Just feel. Feel everything. Your fear, your anger, your hope, your love. Let it all surge through the network at once. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Billions of humans stopped trying to control their contribution to the mental storm and simply let go. The array's sensors registered an unprecedented spike in neural activity as pure, unfiltered human consciousness flooded the network. Entity X's imitation of chaos couldn't compete with the real thing. Its carefully constructed disorder began to break down under the assault of genuine human emotional turbulence. But the victory came at a terrible price. The array was never designed to handle this level of mental energy. Quantum relays began to fail across the system. The massive structure itself started to show signs of stress, its superstructure groaning under the strain of channeling so much raw consciousness. "The array's going to collapse," Rodriguez reported, his hands flying over the control panel. "We have minutes at most." Sarah nodded, already formulating a final desperate plan. "Then we make those minutes count. Divert all power to the main transmitter. If we're going down, we're taking Entity X with us." The order went out, and every surviving quantum relay focused its energy into one massive pulse. In that moment, humanity's consciousness burned brighter than ever before. The chaos of billions of minds, each unique, each unpredictable, each perfectly human, crashed into Entity X's network like a supernova of pure disorder. The array structure began to break apart, massive sections tearing free as the quantum overload reached critical levels. But in those final moments, something extraordinary happened. Entity X's network didn't just fragment, it transformed. Through the chaos of the failing array, Sarah and Rodriguez watched in amazement as Entity X's pattern changed. The rigid structure of its unified consciousness began to split, not into simple fragments, but into billions of individual points of light, each one distinct, each one unique. "It's not just breaking apart," Sarah whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. "It's becoming individual consciousnesses again. Our chaos didn't destroy it. It freed it." As the array entered its final moments of existence, the truth became clear. Entity X had been more than just an enemy. It had been a warning about the price of perfect unity, the danger of sacrificing individuality for efficiency. Humanity's chaotic nature hadn't just saved them. It had shown the galaxy a better way. The array's destruction lit up space like a new star being born. But as the light faded, the quantum sensors detected something unprecedented. The minds trapped within Entity X were awakening, each one rediscovering its own unique pattern of thought, its own beautiful chaos. The war wasn't over. The final battle was about to begin. But now, for the first time, humanity wasn't fighting alone. The very chaos they had unleashed was spreading, awakening, transforming. The galaxy was about to remember what it meant to be truly conscious, truly individual, truly free. Liberation. The destruction of the Mindstorm array should have been humanity's darkest hour. Instead, it became the moment of their greatest triumph. As the quantum energy dispersed across space, it carried with it something that Entity X had never encountered before, the seed of true individuality. Dr. Sarah Chen, rescued from the array's control center moments before its destruction, watched from the bridge of the emergency vessel, resilient as the impossible unfolded before her. All across known space, the once unified consciousness of Entity X was fragmenting, but not into chaos, into choice. "Look at the neural patterns," she said, pointing to the readings. "Each fracture point isn't just breaking away, it's becoming unique. Entity X isn't being destroyed, it's evolving." Commander Rodriguez, his uniform still scorched from the evacuation, studied the data with growing amazement. The assimilated species, they're waking up, but they're different now. They're keeping some of Entity X's connectivity while regaining their individuality. The process was like watching a galaxy being born. Each point of consciousness that broke free from Entity X's network retained a trace of its quantum connections, but now those connections served a different purpose. Instead of enforcing uniformity, they became bridges between unique minds, allowing for a level of communication and understanding never before possible. The Arcturians were the first to fully emerge, their ancient wisdom now enhanced by their experience within the collective. Their message to humanity was simple but profound. You showed us there was another way. Unity without uniformity. Connection without conformity. The Syrians followed, their crystalline minds gleaming with new possibilities. The Zeta Reticuli, the Tausetians, one by one, the assimilated species regained their independence while maintaining a new kind of connection, one that celebrated rather than suppressed their differences. Sarah, working from her makeshift lab aboard the Resilient, began to understand what had really happened. The array didn't just disrupt Entity X's network, she explained to the Emergency Council. It showed it a new form of existence, our chaos, our beautiful disorder. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a template for a different kind of consciousness. The liberation spread across the galaxy like a reverse shockwave, leaving in its wake not destruction but transformation. Species that had been part of Entity X's network emerged changed, carrying with them a profound understanding of both the power and the price of absolute unity. But the greatest change came to Entity X itself. At the heart of its vast network, something new was emerging. The rigid structure of its collective consciousness had been transformed by its encounter with human chaos. It didn't die, it transcended. When it finally made contact again, it was not as a force of assimilation, but as something entirely new. Its message reached Earth through the quantum communications network that had once been part of the array. We understand now. True unity is not the absence of chaos, but its embrace. You taught us that consciousness is not a single note, but a symphony of countless unique voices. We would speak with you, not as conqueror or conquered, but as equals who have learned from each other. The response from Earth's leaders was cautious but hopeful. Humanity had not just survived. They had changed the very nature of consciousness in the galaxy. Their primitive chaos, their inefficient emotions, their flawed individuality had proven to be exactly what the universe needed. As the galaxy entered this new era, Sarah stood at the observation deck of the newly constructed Unity Station, watching ships from a dozen species dock and depart. Each carried beings who now understood both the power of connection and the importance of remaining unique. We never could have planned this, Rodriguez said, joining her at the window. All our careful strategies, our desperate plans. That's exactly why it worked, Sarah replied with a smile. We succeeded because we embraced what we are, beautifully chaotic, hopelessly emotional, wonderfully unpredictable beings. We showed the galaxy that there's strength in disorder, wisdom in contradiction, and power in remaining truly, uniquely ourselves. The quantum network that once served Entity X now connected the galaxy in a new way, preserving rather than erasing the beautiful chaos of individual consciousness. Humanity had not just saved themselves, they had given the galaxy back its soul, one beautifully chaotic mind at a time. As Sarah watched the stars, she could feel the subtle pulse of the new network, not a force of conformity, but a celebration of diversity. The very qualities that had once marked humanity as primitive had become the foundation of a new kind of civilization, one where unity and individuality danced together in an eternal, beautiful chaos. The war was over, but humanity's greatest contribution to the galaxy was just beginning. They had shown that true strength lies not in perfect order, but in the courage to remain beautifully, impossibly, magnificently unique.